I sat in the cold shadows, staring at the house I had worked 30 years to buy. Inside, my son was laughing at his wedding reception, surrounded by guests who thought I was dead. He did not know that earlier this afternoon. I signed the papers to sell the very floor he was dancing on. Tomorrow morning, his wedding gift will not be a check, but an eviction notice giving him exactly 30 days to leave. My name is Margaret Ellison, though most people just call me Maggie. At 62 years old, I should have been seated at the head table inside the warm, glowing house at the end of the quiet cul-de-sac in Riverton. Instead, I sat alone behind the wheel of my sedan, the engine off, the interior rapidly losing heat against the biting chill of the late autumn night. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles turned white, but the physical cold was nothing compared to the icy void expanding in my chest. I stared at the house. It was a beautiful structure, one that I had selected with painstaking care years ago. The red brick facade looked sturdy and inviting under the amber porch lights, and the grey slate roof sloped gently over the wide veranda where I had once imagined sitting on Sunday afternoons. I remembered signing the closing papers for this place, thinking I was securing a legacy, a forever home for my only son, Lucas. I had believed I was building a fortress for his future happiness, a place where he would never know the insecurity that had plagued my own youth. Through the large bay window of the living room, I could see them clearly. There was Lucas, looking handsome in his tuxedo with his tie loosened, laughing at something one of his groomsmen said. Beside him stood Sophie Carver, his new wife, still in her white lace wedding gown. She was cutting a slice from a tiered cake that sat on the dining table, her face radiant with joy. They were celebrating the beginning of their life together, surrounded by friends and family. But I was not there. They did not even know I was parked 50 feet away in the shadows, watching the life they had built on a foundation of lies. A bitter taste rose in my throat as I recalled the text message Lucas had sent me just 3 weeks ago. "Mum, the wedding is going to be very small." He had written, "We are just doing something simple at the courthouse." I had believed him. I had swallowed my disappointment and offered to send money for a nice dinner. I had told him I understood. But looking at the crowded room, the expensive catering trays visible on the sideboard, and the professional photographer snapping candids in the corner, I realized simple was just a code word for "you are not welcome." He had not just excluded me from the guest list, he had erased me. However, he did not know that his deception had come with a price tag he could not afford. My phone buzzed on the passenger seat, the light cutting through the darkness of the car. I glanced at the screen. It was a message from my lawyer. "The transfer documents have been filed with the county clerk. Effective as of 8 o'clock tomorrow morning." A grim, humorless smile touched my lips. Earlier this afternoon, while Lucas was likely exchanging vows and promising to love Sophie until death parted them, I had been sitting in a conference room with a young couple named Aaron and Lila. I had signed a binding contract to sell them this very house. Lucas and Sophie had forgotten one crucial detail about their dream home. They did not own it. They never had. The deed remained firmly in the possession of Helio Morrow Estates, my real estate company. The gift I had given Lucas years ago was nothing more than a verbal promise and a standard lease agreement hidden in my company files, a lease that I had every legal right to terminate. They were currently dancing on a floor that technically belonged to someone else. To anyone looking in, I might seem like a monster who sells the roof over their child's head on his wedding night. but to understand why a mother would pull the ground out from under her son, you have to understand how he buried me first. You have to understand that before I sold this house, Lucas had already sold his integrity. I looked up at the second-floor window one last time. It was dark now. But that was the room I had always mentally earmarked for the nursery. I had planned to paint it a soft yellow. I had planned to read stories there. Now, strangers would decide the colour of the walls. I turned the key in the ignition. The engine purred to life, a low growl that broke the silence of the street. I did not look back as I shifted into drive and pulled away from the curb. The night my son hid me from his wedding was the night I decided to teach him exactly how it feels to lose your home, your reputation, and your mother, all at once. To understand why I sat in that freezing car, watching my son celebrate without me, you have to understand where I came from. I grew up in a forgotten town in the Midwest, where the wind cut through the walls of our trailer like a knife. My mother was a single parent who worked 3 jobs just to keep us fed. Yet we still lived in a perpetual state of fear. I learned the language of eviction notices before I learned how to ride a bicycle. That fear planted a seed in my chest, a dark, heavy knot that whispered a single command: secure a roof that no one can take away. I did not have a college degree or a trust fund. I started as a receptionist for a property management firm, answering phones and making coffee for men who viewed houses as lines on a spreadsheet. I was invisible to them, so I listened. I learned how to read a contract until my eyes burned. I learned where the hidden costs lay and how to spot a desperate seller. With my tips and overtime pay, I scraped together enough to buy a tiny, run-down studio apartment. It was ugly, but it was mine. Then came Lucas. His father was a street musician with a voice like honey and a heart like the wind. He stayed just long enough to leave me pregnant and alone. I remember holding Lucas for the first time in the hospital, looking at his tiny, crinkled face, and making a vow that felt more like a curse. You will never have to sleep in a car like I did, I whispered to him, my voice trembling with exhaustion. Those early years were a blur of hard hats and sawdust. I could not afford a babysitter. So Lucas came with me. While other children played in sandboxes, Lucas played on subfloors. I taught him to recognize the smell of fresh primer and how to read the blue lines of a schematic. Real estate became our secret language. The way I told him I loved him without saying the words. Every brick I laid, every deal I closed, was a brick in the wall I was building around him to keep the world out. Eventually, I founded Helio Morrow Estates. I know. The name sounds a bit too cosmic, perhaps a little naive, but to me it meant a bright tomorrow for my son. The company grew, and so did Lucas. He was a beautiful boy, intelligent and charming, with a smile that could talk his way out of any trouble. But in my blind adoration, I ignored the cracks in the foundation. I ignored how he always wanted to be the team captain, but never wanted to carry the equipment. He wanted the glory of ownership without the weight of the risk. When Lucas turned 18, I drove him to the house in Riverton. It was empty then, bathed in the golden light of late afternoon. We stood in the foyer, our voices echoing off the hardwood floors. "This will be yours one day," I told him, watching his eyes widen as he looked at the high ceilings. "When you are ready to settle down, this is where you will start." "You mean it?" "Mum? It's really mine?" he asked, his face lighting up with that greedy, innocent joy. "It is," I said. "I am just keeping my name on the paper for now, for safety." That was the truth. but not the whole truth. To protect the asset, the house remained under the ownership of Helio Morrow Estates. I had Lucas sign a standard lease agreement, charging him a symbolic rent of $1 per month. It was a formality, a way to keep the tax records clean and the insurance valid. I never imagined that a piece of paper meant to protect him would eventually become the weapon I used to destroy his comfort. When he graduated with his business degree and landed a job at a marketing firm, he moved in. I remember the day I handed him the keys. I felt a profound sense of peace, believing I had finally exorcised the ghosts of my poverty-stricken childhood. I had given him the head start I never had. Now, sitting in the dark, the irony is sharp enough to bleed. I can recall every detail of the day I gave him that home, the weight of the brass key in my palm, the pride in my chest. Lucas has likely forgotten that specific date entirely. However, I am certain he will remember very clearly the date he is forced to give the keys back. It started subtly, like a slow leak in a water pipe that you do not notice until the wall is already rotting from the inside. The first time Lucas introduced me to Sophie, we met at a trendy garden-style restaurant in downtown Riverton. Sophie was lovely. I had to admit, she worked in event public relations, and she had that polished, effortless charm that comes from never having to worry about where your next meal is coming from. "Oh, Mrs. Ellison, Lucas has told me so much about you," Sophie had said, reaching across the table to squeeze my hand. Her manicured nails were perfect ovals of pale pink. "Do you mind if I call you?" "Mom, it just feels right." It felt too fast, but I was so eager to be accepted into this new chapter of my son's life that I smiled and nodded. I did not realize then that her sweetness was a professional skill, not a personal trait. As Lucas climbed the corporate ladder at his marketing firm, the distance between us grew. Our Sunday dinners became monthly, then sporadic. His phone calls, which used to be long rambles about his week, turned into clipped, efficient exchanges. "Mom, I am really busy right now," he would say, his voice tight. "Can we talk?" "Later, my schedule is just packed." The later rarely came. The shame was the next thing to arrive. I drove a 10-year-old sedan, reliable but rusted around the wheel wells. It was the car that had carried materials for my business for a decade. One afternoon, I offered to pick Lucas up from his office for a quick lunch. "Actually, Mom," he said, his voice dropping a decibel, "don't pull up to the front entrance. Just wait at the corner down the street. We have some very high-profile clients leaving the building today, and traffic is a nightmare." I knew it was not about the traffic. I parked 2 blocks away, watching him jog toward me, checking over his shoulder to ensure none of his high-profile colleagues saw him getting into his mother's beat-up vehicle. Sophie played her part in this slow erosion of my dignity as well. She never said anything outright cruel, but her comments were like little paper cuts. "Lucas told me all about your early years," she said once over coffee, tilting her head with feigned sympathy. "It is so inspiring how you survived. I mean, sleeping in a car that sounds just terrifying. I don't think I could handle that kind of filth." She made my resilience sound like a disease she was afraid of catching. Then came the moment that should have been my wake-up call. I was over at their house. My house fixing a leaky faucet in the kitchen because Lucas claimed he did not know how to use a wrench. He was in the next room, talking on his phone. He must have thought the running water masked his voice. But I turned the tap off just as he spoke. "No. You don't understand. Lucas was saying to someone, likely a friend, or perhaps one of Sophie's relatives, my mum. She just doesn't fit with that crowd. She is a little rough around the edges, and she is so controlling. I have to keep some boundaries. I stood frozen, gripping the wrench, feeling the cold steel bite into my palm. Controlling. I had given him a house for $1 a month. Rough around the edges, I was the one who smoothed every path he had ever walked. The shadow of the Carver family. Sophie's parents began to loom over us. I had never met them, but I knew of them. They owned a chain of private medical clinics and were fixtures in the local society pages. Every time I asked Lucas when the families would meet, he deflected. "They are in Europe this month," he would say, or, "Dad Carver is really stressed with the merger. It is not a good time." The final straw, the one that should have made me scream, came in silence. I was scrolling through social media late one night when the algorithm suggested a post for me. It was a photo of Sophie standing on a podium, wearing a white wedding gown, surrounded by her friends, holding champagne flutes. The caption read, "Found, the one Carver love story future misses." I clicked on Lucas's profile. There were photos of an engagement shoot I knew nothing about professional lighting, a vineyard setting. Lucas looking adoringly at Sophie. There was no mention of the name Ellison anywhere. It was all about the Carver legacy. When I confronted him the next day, showing him the screen of my phone, he did not even blush. "Mom, come on," he said, waving a hand dismissively. "We were just looking. Those photos were just for fun. We haven't decided anything yet. Please don't start drama over nothing. The comments say, 'Can't wait for the big day.'" "Lucas," I said, my voice trembling. "People just say stuff." "Mom, you are reading into it. Stop being so paranoid." He looked me in the eye and lied, and I let him do it because I was terrified of losing him. But that night, I started a list in my head. I began to catalogue every lie, every deflection, every moment he was ashamed of the woman who had built his world. I did not know it then. But I was drafting the bill for a debt he would soon have to pay with the very roof over his head. The summer morning was bright and clear, but the notification on my phone screen brought an instant, suffocating darkness. An old friend from high school had sent me a photo with no warning. There, under an arch of white roses, stood Lucas and Sophie. He was in a tuxedo I had never seen, and she was in a designer gown, clutching a bouquet of lilies. The caption read, "Congratulations to Lucas and Sophie on their big day." My fingers trembled as I checked the timestamp. The photo had been taken 3 days ago. 3 days ago. While I was sitting in my kitchen, wondering if my son was eating enough or if his work was stressful, he was saying "I do" in front of a crowd of strangers. There had been no invitation, no phone call, no explanation. I was his mother, and I had been completely omitted from the most important day of his life. I frantically scrolled through the tagged posts, my breath coming in short, shallow gasps. I found a video clip posted by one of Sophie's bridesmaids. The audio was tinny, but the words of the master of ceremonies cut through me like a serrated knife. "We all know Lucas has overcome so much adversity." The man's voice boomed over the speakers. "Losing his mother at such a young age was a tragedy that no child should endure. But we are so grateful that the Carver family has taken him in and loved him as their own son." The room spun, losing his mother. He had not just excluded me, he had killed me. To his new family, to his wealthy in-laws, to his entire social circle. I was a corpse in the ground. I was a tragic backstory invented to make him seem more resilient, more interesting. I was not a person to him anymore. I was a plot device that he had discarded. I did not pack a bag. I did not change my clothes. I got into my car and drove to Riverton. I broke every speed limit on the way. My vision blurred, not by tears, but by a red-hot rage that felt like it would burn the world down to ash. When I pulled up to the house, the evidence of the celebration was still there. White ribbons fluttered on the porch railing, and expensive floral arrangements lined the walkway. Lucas was in the driveway, unloading suitcases from a black SUV. He looked tan, happy, and successful. He froze when he saw me walking up the driveway. The colour drained from his face faster than water down a drain. "Mom," he whispered, the suitcase slipping from his hand. "You told them I was dead." I asked. My voice was not a scream. It was a low, dangerous growl. "You stood there and let them toast to my memory, Mom." "Please," he stammered, looking around nervously as if the neighbours might witness his shame. I can explain." Sophie stepped out of the house, looking pristine in her travel clothes. She saw me and stopped dead. "Maggie." "Oh God." "Lucas said you were mentally unwell, that you wouldn't understand." "I understand perfectly," I said, stepping closer to my son. "I understand that I am dead to you." "It is not like that." Lucas snapped, his fear turning into defensive anger. "The Carvers, they are different, Mum. They are old money. They are conservative. They do not like mess. They wouldn't understand a single mother who drove a truck and scraped by. I wanted everything to be perfect. I did not want any trouble." "Trouble?" I asked, feeling a sharp pain in my chest that had nothing to do with my heart and everything to do with my soul. "I am your mother. I scrubbed floors to feed you. And I am trouble. You are the ugly part of the past that I do not want people dissecting." He shouted, the veins in his neck bulging. "I am trying to build a future here. Why can't you just stay in your lane? You are embarrassing." "Okay. I did not want them looking at you and judging me." The words hit me like physical blows. The ugly part of the past. I pushed past him, marching up the steps and into the house. I needed to see it. I walked into the living room. The mantelpiece, where I had once placed his graduation photo, was now a shrine to the Carvers. There was Lucas with Sophie's father on a golf course, Lucas and Sophie in Paris, Lucas with the Carver family at a gala. I walked from room to room. There was not a single picture of me, no baby photos, no holiday snapshots. It was a complete erasure. I had been wiped from existence in the very home I had paid for. "Get out." Lucas was behind me now, his face twisted in fury. "You have no right to barge in here. This is our house. Do not come in here and make a scene." I stopped. The air in the room went still. I turned to look at him. This stranger wearing my son's face. He was pointing at the door, vibrating with entitlement. "Your house," I repeated softly. "Yes, our house," he yelled. "Mine and Sophie's. So get out before I call the cops." I looked at him, and a cold, hard laugh bubbled up in my throat. It was not a happy sound. It was the sound of a bridge burning. He really believed it. He believed that because he lived here, because he played house here, that he owned it. He had forgotten the one thing that mattered in the real world, the signature on the deed. "Fine. I said, my voice steady. I am leaving. I walked out the door, leaving him standing in the foyer of a house he thought he owned, with a wife who thought he was an orphan. He had no idea that the dead woman walking to her car held the power to resurrect herself in the form of an eviction notice. I drove away from the house in Riverton with my hands steady on the wheel, but my heart had turned into a block of ice. I did not go home to cry. I did not go to a bar to drown my sorrows. I drove straight to the small brick building that housed the headquarters of Helio Morrow Estates. This was the place where I had taught Lucas how to read a zoning map, where I had shown him that a spreadsheet was a language more honest than poetry. It seemed fitting that this office would be the place where I dismantled his life. I unlocked the door and flipped on the fluorescent lights. The hum of the overhead bulbs was the only sound in the room. I walked to the filing cabinet, the metal cold against my fingertips, and pulled the thick folder labelled Riverton Property. I spread the documents out on my desk. There it was, the deed, the title insurance, the tax assessments, and the lease agreement. I ran my finger down the lines of text. I had always been meticulous, a trait born of fear, and that fear was about to become my greatest weapon. 5 years ago, during a corporate restructuring to protect my assets from liability, I had moved all my residential holdings, including the house Lucas lived in, into a revocable living trust. I was the sole trustee. I was the sole beneficiary. I picked up the phone and dialed my lawyer, a man who had been with me since I bought my first duplex. "Margaret," he answered, his voice groggy. "It is. 10 o'clock at night. Is everything all right? I need you to check the termination clause on the Riverton lease," I said, my voice flat and professional. "The tenant is Lucas Ellison." There was a pause, the sound of rustling papers on the other end. "Maggie, that is your son. The lease is a formality. It is a month-to-month agreement at a rate of $1. You know this. I need to know if I can sell the property with the tenant in place." I interrupted. "And if the new owner has the right to evict." "Well, yes," he said, the confusion evident in his tone. "Since it is a month-to-month tenancy, you or a new owner can terminate the lease with 30 days of written notice. There is no long-term protection." "But Maggie..." "What are you doing?" "I am liquidating an underperforming asset," I said. "Draft the papers." I hung up before he could ask why. I sat back in my chair and stared at the lease. Lucas had signed it with a flourish, laughing at the formality of paying $1 a month. He saw it as a joke. I saw it as a lifeline I was about to cut. I opened my laptop and logged into the company email server. I found a thread from a few months ago where Lucas had forwarded me architectural plans for a swimming pool he wanted to build in the backyard. He had asked for $40,000 to fund it. I had refused, telling him to save his own money. I read his reply to Sophie, which he had accidentally copied me on back then. "Don't worry, babe. The old lady is tight-fisted, but the house is ours. We will just wait until she kicks the bucket, and then we can build whatever we want." At the time, I had brushed it off as frustration. Now, reading it again after hearing him declare me dead to his wedding guests, the words twisted in my gut. He was already waiting for me to die. He had already spent his inheritance in his mind. For a second, my finger hovered over the delete key. I could just cut him off. I could change my will. But wills were for the dead, and I was very much alive. A change in a will was a secret. It was abstract, losing the roof over his head. That was concrete. That was real. You said I was dead. Lucas. I whispered to the empty room. Well, dead mothers do not provide housing. I picked up the phone again and called a young broker named Sarah, a sharp girl I had mentored 2 years ago. Sarah, I said when she answered, I have a pocket listing, the Riverton house. I want to sell it immediately. Cash offer preferred. Quick close. It comes with a tenant, but the lease is terminable. The Riverton house, Sarah asked, sounding shocked. Isn't that where Lucas lives? It is a business decision, I said, cutting off her curiosity. He is away on a trip for the next few days. I want you to bring a buyer tomorrow. Do you have anyone looking? I have a young couple, Aaron and Lila. They have been desperate for that neighborhood. They have pre-approval. Bring them at 10 o'clock tomorrow morning. I commanded. I will be there with the keys. I hung up and pulled a fresh sheet of legal stationery from the drawer. I began to type. To Mr. Lucas Ellison. Regarding the property at 42 Oak Creek Lane. Notice of termination of tenancy. I typed every word with precision. 30 days. Vacate the premises. Inspection upon departure. I looked up at the wall of my office. Years ago, I had framed a quote and hung it there to teach Lucas a lesson about the business. It read, "Assets are a responsibility, not a trophy." He had never understood it. He thought the house was a trophy, a medal he deserved just for existing. Tonight, I finally understood that the quote applied to me, too. My son was not a person I could own or mold. He was a bad investment, and it was time to cut my losses. The next morning, my phone lit up with a notification. It was a photo from Lucas, posted to his public story. He and Sophie were holding mugs of hot cocoa against a backdrop of pine trees and mountains, with a caption that read, "Honeymoon vibes. Starting our forever." I swiped the notification away and stepped out of my car. I was not in the mountains. I was standing on the front porch of the house in Riverton, flanked by Sarah, my broker, and a young couple named Aaron and Lila. While my son was sipping cocoa, I was sliding my spare key into the lock of the front door. The heavy oak door swung open, and immediately the scent hit us. It was a cloying mixture of wilting white roses, stale champagne, and expensive perfume. The house felt heavy, like the air inside was still holding its breath from the celebration I had been barred from. "Oh, wow," Lila said, stepping into the foyer and looking around at the garlands still draped over the banister. "It looks like. Did they just have a party here?" "Yes," I said, my voice cool and detached. "Something like that. The current tenant? He enjoys hosting." As Sarah led the couple into the kitchen to show off the granite countertops and the custom cabinetry, I slipped away up the stairs. My feet moved silently on the carpet runner I had paid for 3 years ago. I walked into the master bedroom. The bed was unmade, a tangle of white sheets. But my eyes were drawn to the wall above the dresser. Lucas had already hung a framed print of one of their engagement photos, and next to it, taped hastily to the wall, was a Polaroid from the wedding day. It was just the two of them, smiling as if they owned the world. I looked around the room for a single trace of myself. A card, a gift, a picture of the woman who had co-signed his student loans. There was nothing. I was standing in a museum of a life where I did not exist. I went back downstairs. Aaron and Lila were standing in the living room, whispering. They looked anxious. "Mrs. Ellison," Aaron said, turning to me. "We love the house. It is perfect. But Sarah mentioned there is a tenant. We need to move in next month. We can't handle an eviction battle. There will be no battle. Sarah interjected smoothly, though I could see the tension in her jaw. The tenant is on a month-to-month lease. You have no obligation to keep him. We can serve the 30-day notice immediately upon closing. Lila bit her lip. It still feels risky. I stepped forward. I looked at the house that had been my pride and was now my prison. I will lower the asking price, I said clearly. I will knock $20,000 off the list price. But only if we sign the papers today and you agree to take possession in 30 days. Aaron's eyes widened. $20,000 was a down payment on a car. It was a significant amount of money to lose, but to me, it was simply the transaction fee for my dignity. $20,000, Aaron asked, looking at his wife. Honey, that covers all the renovations we wanted. Done, Lila whispered, a smile breaking across her face. 2 hours later. We were sitting in the conference room of my lawyer's office. The air conditioning hummed, a stark contrast to the heat rising in my blood. The lawyer slid the stack of documents across the mahogany table. Contract of sale. Transfer of deed. I picked up the pen. My hand trembled slightly, not from hesitation, but from the sheer adrenaline of the act. I pressed the tip to the paper. The scratching sound of the pen signing my name felt loud in the quiet room, like the sound of a hammer driving nails into wood. With each signature, I was severing the cord. Margaret Ellison, trustee, seller. Congratulations, the lawyer said, stamping the final document. Once this is recorded with the county, the property belongs to Aaron and Lila. Helio Morrow Estates will receive the funds by wire transfer. And the notice I asked? Prepared, he said, handing me a thick envelope. Notice to quit. 30 days. Standard procedure. Send it via courier. I commanded, my voice hard. I want a signature required upon delivery. I do not want him to say, I didn't see it. That evening, I parked down the street from the house again. I watched as a uniformed courier walked up the driveway, past the just married sign that was still stuck into the lawn. He slid the thick envelope into the mailbox because no one was home to sign. But he took a photo of the delivery for proof. As the courier drove away, my phone buzzed again. It was a message in the family group chat, a chat that included cousins and aunts who had been at the wedding. Lucas. Having the absolute best time of my life. Love you all. I stared at the screen. The blue light illuminated the dashboard. I typed my reply slowly, savoring every letter. Congratulations. My wedding gift is on its way to your doorstep. I hit send, started the engine, and drove away, leaving the house behind in the darkness, waiting for its new owners. Life felt perfect as I turned our SUV onto Oak Creek Lane. The short trip to the mountains had been exactly what I needed to decompress after the wedding. I reached over the center console and squeezed Sophie's hand. Her ring sparkled in the afternoon sun. A diamond that had cost me 3 months of salary. But it was worth every cent to see her smile. You know, I said, looking at the large oak tree in the front yard as we pulled into the driveway. We should put a tire swing up there. For the kids. Someday. Sophie giggled, leaning her head on my shoulder. Let's just get unpacked first. Lucas. I parked the car and walked up the front steps, feeling like the king of my own little castle. There was a thick envelope sitting on the doormat. It was not a standard letter. It was heavy, delivered by a courier service. Look at that, I said, picking it up. Probably a late wedding gift. Maybe one of your dad's rich friends sent a check. I tore open the tab, expecting a card. Instead, I pulled out a stack of stiff, legal documents. The first page was titled in bold, black letters, Notice of Termination of Tenancy. I frowned, my brain refusing to process the words. I flipped to the next page. Notice of Transfer of Property Ownership. What is it, babe? Sophie asked, unlocking the front door. I don't know. I stammered. It looks like legal junk. Sophie grabbed the papers from my hand. Her eyes scanned the page, and I watched the colour drain from her face until she looked like a ghost. Lucas, she whispered, her voice trembling. Who are Aaron and Lila? Who it says here that the property has been sold to Aaron and Lila. She read, her voice rising in panic. And it says we have 30 days to vacate the premises. It is signed by a lawyer representing Helio Morrow Estates. She looked up at me, her eyes wide with confusion. And there is a carbon copy notation at the bottom, C.C. Margaret Ellison. My stomach dropped. The name hit me like a physical punch. Mom. That's a mistake, I said, snatching the papers back. Mom gave us this house. She wouldn't. I pulled out my phone and dialed her number. My hands were shaking so hard I almost dropped the device. It rang once, twice, 3 times. Then, her voicemail picked up. You have reached Margaret Ellison. Please leave a message. I had told everyone she was dead. I had stood in front of 200 people and let them believe she was gone. Now, hearing her recorded voice, the silence on the other end felt like the grave I had dug for her was suddenly opening up to swallow me. Mum, I yelled into the phone, even though I knew she wasn't listening. Mum, pick up. This isn't funny. I hung up and dialed the main line for Helio Morrow Estates. A robotic assistant answered. Mrs. Ellison is not accepting direct inquiries at this time. All tenant disputes must be submitted via email. Tenant? I choked out. I am her son. We have to go to the lawyer, I told Sophie. Right now. 30 minutes later. We were standing in the sterile reception area of the law firm listed on the letterhead. The lawyer, a man with cold grey eyes, did not offer us a seat. There is no mistake, Mr. Ellison, he said calmly, looking over his spectacles. The property was owned by Helio Morrow Estates. You signed a month-to-month lease agreement 4 years ago. The owner has exercised her right to sell the asset. You have 30 days. But she gave it to me, I shouted, slamming my hand on the desk. It was a gift. Do you have a deed? The lawyer asked. Do you have a title transfer? No. You have a lease that charges you $1 a month. That is a rental agreement, Mr. Ellison, and it has been terminated. I felt Sophie step away from me. I turned to look at her. She wasn't looking at the lawyer. She was looking at me with a mixture of horror and realization. You lied, she whispered. You told me she signed it over. You told my parents it was our asset. I thought she did. I pleaded, reaching for her arm. But she flinched away. Sophie, it's just a formality. I can fix this. We drove back to the house in silence. The air in the car was toxic. When we pulled up to the curb, a silver sedan was parked in front of our driveway. A young couple was standing on the lawn, pointing at the roof. A man in a polo shirt held a tape measure. I got out of the car, my blood boiling. Hey, what are you doing here? The man turned. He looked about my age, but he had the relaxed, confident posture of someone who wasn't losing everything. "Hi," he said, extending a hand. "I'm Aaron. You must be Lucas, the tenant. We just bought the place. We wanted to take a few measurements for the renovations before we move in next month." The tenant. The word tasted like ash in my mouth. "You can't just come here," I spat out. "We live here." "For 30 more days," Aaron said, his smile fading into a firm line. "Look, man, we don't want any trouble. We got a great deal on this place because of the situation. We are willing to let you stay the full 30 days, but after that, we are moving in. No exceptions." He looked past me at the house, my house with the possessiveness of an owner. I suddenly felt small. I felt exactly the way I had made Mom feel when I told her to park down the street so my colleagues wouldn't see her truck. I walked past him, dragging my feet, and entered the living room. Sophie was already sitting on the couch, staring at the wall. I looked around. The wedding photos were still on the mantelpiece. Me and Sophie. Me and the Carvers. Yesterday. Those photos were proof of my success. I had the perfect wife, the perfect job, the perfect house. Now, standing in a room that belonged to a stranger named Aaron, I realized they were just props. I had built a stage set, and the director had just fired the lead actor. "Lucas," Sophie said, her voice hollow. "Where are we going to go?" I opened my mouth to answer, but for the first time in my life, I didn't have a clever lie to save me. The humiliation did not hit me all at once like a tidal wave. It seeped in slowly, like cold water rising in a sinking ship. It started at the office. I walked in on Tuesday, expecting the usual nods of respect for the star account manager. Instead, I was met with hushed whispers near the coffee machine. The news that I was being evicted from my owned home had apparently travelled faster than a viral marketing campaign. Desperation makes you do stupid things. With the deposit for a new, mediocre apartment looming over me, requires first and last month's rent, plus a security deposit. I walked into the HR office and asked for an emergency salary advance. "I just need $5,000, I told the HR director, trying to keep my voice steady. "Just a temporary cash flow issue due to real estate restructuring." She didn't smile. She looked at her screen, then up at me with a gaze that felt like a microscope. "Lucas, given the request, upper management decided to review your current standing. The CFO wants to see you." My stomach dropped. The CFO never wanted to see anyone unless someone was getting fired or sued. I walked into the glass-walled office, sweating through my dress shirt. On the desk lay a printout of my corporate credit card statement. "Lucas," the CFO said, not bothering to offer me a seat. "We have been overlooking some of your client entertainment expenses because your sales numbers were high. But now that you are asking for company funds, we took a closer look." He circled a line item with a red pen. "This dinner at the Gilded Lily for $400. Who was the client?" I froze. That was the night I took Sophie out to celebrate our engagement. I had expensed it as prospecting. It was a potential lead. I lied, my voice cracking. "We called the restaurant," he said, his voice devoid of emotion. "They remembered the engagement ring and this weekend trip to the coast. You flagged it as a regional conference. There was no conference. The dominoes were clicking against each other, falling one by one. The house was the first tile, and now my career was teetering. "We are placing you on unpaid suspension, pending a full audit," he said. "Leave your badge on the desk." If the office was a nightmare, dinner at the Carver estate was a funeral. The dining room was silent, save for the sound of silver cutlery hitting fine china. Richard Carver, my father-in-law, sat at the head of the table, cutting his steak with surgical precision. "I made a few calls today." "Lucas," Richard said without looking up. I swallowed a piece of potato that felt like a stone in my throat. "Richard, I don't," he interrupted, pointing his knife at me. "I want to know one thing. How can your mother sell a house if it belongs to you?" I looked at Sophie. She was staring at her plate, refusing to meet my eyes. It was complicated," I stammered. "Technically, it was in a trust. I thought." Technically, Richard dropped his knife. It clattered loudly. "In my world, you either own the asset or you do not. You told us you were a property owner. You told us you were financially independent. Now I find out you were a tenant paying $1 a month. I am disappointed," Helen Carver said softly from across the table. Her voice hurt more than Richard's anger. "Sophie told us you were stable. We thought you were a self-made man. But it seems your entire life was a story embroidered on the generosity of a woman you decided to erase." "She is difficult," I burst out, the defense weak even to my own ears. "You don't know her." "Clearly," Sophie said, finally looking up. Her eyes were red. "I have never met her. Lucas, I have never even heard you speak to her with kindness. I realized today that everything I know about your mother comes from you, and you are a liar." The drive back to the house I had to leave in 27 days, was silent. My phone wouldn't stop buzzing. My friends, the ones who had danced at my wedding, were now sharing screenshots of the public property records. The narrative had shifted. I wasn't the victim. I was the guy who hid his mother from his wedding and got evicted as a wedding gift. It was too dramatic not to share. My parents called her, Sophie said suddenly as we walked into the hallway filled with half-packed boxes. I froze. "What they called Maggie?" she said, her voice trembling. "They wanted to hear her side. They are on the phone with her right now." Panic, cold and sharp, pierced my chest. You can't let them do that. She will twist everything. She will ruin me." "You ruined yourself," Sophie said, walking up the stairs and closing the bedroom door, locking it behind her. I stood alone in the living room. The wedding photos on the wall seemed to mock me. I sat on a taped-up box, burying my face in my hands. My phone pinged with an email notification. It was from the company server, likely the last email I would receive before they cut my access. Subject regarding employment status. "Mr. Ellison, please bring your company laptop and corporate card to the office tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock. We need to talk about the findings of our audit. Legal counsel will be present." I looked around the house I did not own, thinking about the job I no longer had, and the wife who wouldn't look at me. The first domino had fallen days ago, but the sound of the crash was deafening. The call came from a number I did not recognize. I almost let it go to voicemail, expecting another reporter or a confused vendor, but something told me to answer. "Mrs. Ellison." The voice was deep, cultured, and undeniably authoritative. "This is Richard Carver. I believe we share a problem." We met an hour later at a quiet coffee shop on the edge of town, far away from the prying eyes of Riverton's social circles. Richard looked tired. The crisp lines of his suit seemed at odds with the slump of his shoulders. He ordered black coffee, folded his hands on the table, and looked me in the eye. "I want to understand." he said quietly. Lucas told us you died when he was a teenager. He painted a picture of a tragic, self-made orphan. Then yesterday, I found my daughter weeping because you are selling the house they live in. I need to know the truth. I did not embellish. I did not cry. I simply laid the facts out like a deck of cards. I told him about the 3 jobs I worked to keep Lucas fed. I told him about Heliomorrow Estates. I told him about the house in Riverton, purchased with my own savings and leased to Lucas for $1 a month so he could save for his own future. And finally, I told him about standing outside the window on his wedding night, watching them toast to my memory. Richard listened in silence, his expression hardening with every sentence. When I finished, I expected him to defend his son-in-law, to plead for leniency for Sophie's sake. Instead, he leaned back and let out a dry, bitter chuckle. "If I were you," Richard said, shaking his head, "I might have done worse. You gave them 30 days, that is generous. The business world is not that kind." I blinked, surprised by his cold pragmatism. "He didn't just lie to you. Margaret," Richard continued, his voice dropping to a low growl. "I looked into his accounts after the wedding fiasco. Lucas has been dropping my name all over town. He has been telling suppliers that Carver Capital is backing his personal investments. He tried to leverage a line of credit based on a partnership with me that does not exist. It is reckless. It is fraud." I sat back, the realization washing over me. Selling the house had not just punished Lucas, it had knocked over the first domino in a long line of deceits. I had exposed a house of cards that was already waiting to fall. "He is a liability," Richard said, finishing his coffee, "and I do not invest in liabilities." Later that afternoon, Sophie came to see me. She looked nothing like the radiant bride I had seen through the window. Her eyes were swollen, and she carried a large manila envelope. We stood in the parking lot of my office, the air between us heavy with awkwardness. "I brought these," she said, her voice trembling as she handed me the envelope. Inside were the raw files from the wedding photographer. I realized that there is a gap in all of them. A part of the family is missing. She looked up at me, tears spilling over. "I am so sorry." Mother-in-law. It was the first time she had used the title with genuine respect, not as a performance. "You do not owe me an apology, Sophie," I said gently. "And I do not owe you a house. What happens between Lucas and me is our burden to carry. But I will say this. If you ever have children, I will not let my grandchildren grow up inside a lie. They will know who I am. They will," she whispered. "I promise." While we stood there, across town, the final blow was landing. I learned later that Lucas had been summoned to the HR office of his firm. He walked in expecting a reprimand, perhaps a suspension. Instead, he was met by the legal team. "Mr. Ellison," the director said, sliding a termination notice across the desk. "Your misuse of the corporate card for personal luxury expenses constitutes a breach of contract and theft. We are terminating your employment effectively immediately. Please hand over your badge and laptop." He had lost the house he pretended to own, the family he pretended to be born into, and the career he pretended to be too good for. That evening, I drove to the Riverton house one last time. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the red brick facade. Tomorrow, Aaron and Lila would take possession. I walked up to the wall and placed my hand against the rough bricks. It was cold, solid, and real. You did your job. I whispered to the silent house. You sheltered him from the rain and the wind. Now, go shelter people who know how to tell the truth. I turned and walked back to my car, leaving the keys under the mat for the new owners. The debt was paid. It was the 30th day, the final grain of sand in the hourglass I had set upon my son's life. The driveway of the Riverton house was cluttered with cardboard boxes and garbage bags bursting with clothes. The front door stood wide open, exposing the hollow shell of a home that had been stripped of its pretense. I parked my car and walked up the driveway. Inside the living room, Lucas was wrestling with a flat-screen television, trying to wrench it from the wall mount. He looked terrible. His face was covered in a patchy, week-old beard, and dark circles bruised the skin under his eyes. He looked like a man who had not slept since the moment the hammer fell. When he heard my footsteps, he spun around. For a second. His eyes flared with a spark of his old arrogance. "Mom!" he rasped, his voice thick with exhaustion. "You came to watch me suffer, is that it? You came to see me pack my life into boxes so you could feel—" What vindication? I did not answer immediately. I stopped at the threshold, standing on the exact spot where he had blocked my path on his wedding day. The memory of his tuxedo and his shame was still vivid, but it no longer hurt. It just felt like a scene from a movie I had walked out of. I did not come to watch you suffer. Lucas, I said, my voice steady and dry. Suffering is a choice you made when you decided that appearances were worth more than people. I came to give you the one thing I still owe you. The truth I never had the heart to tell you before. I reached into my purse and pulled out a white envelope. I held it out to him. He hesitated, his hands dirty with dust from the move. Before he took it. "What is this?" he asked. "Open it." He tore the seal. Inside was a photocopy of the original purchase contract for this house, dated over 10 years ago. But it was the handwritten note in the margin that caught his eye. In my own handwriting, faded but legible. I had written for Lucas, when he is ready to be a decent man, and right through those words, in thick, black ink that I had drawn the night I sold the house, was a heavy strike-through line. "I bought this house for you," I said softly. "Not to rent, to give." There was a time, right before you met Sophie, when I was preparing the deed of gift, when you told me you wanted a yard for your future children to run in. I almost signed it over that very afternoon. I wanted to give you everything. Lucas stared at the paper, his hands shaking. But then, I continued. You started erasing me. You decided I was too embarrassing for your new life. You decided I was better off dead. I didn't mean it like that, Lucas stammered, dropping the paper. He sank to his knees amidst the chaos of the boxes, the fight draining out of him. I just wanted to fit in. I am sorry, Mum. I am so sorry. He wept, his shoulders shaking with the weight of his regret. It was the apology I had wanted for weeks, but now that it was here, it felt hollow. I looked down at him, but I did not feel the urge to comfort him. I looked at him as if he were a stranger, a man I had once known a long time ago. You hid me from your wedding to make your story perfect, I said, delivering the final verdict. Today, I sold this house to make that story complete. A man who has no mother does not get the house she built. I turned my gaze to Sophie, who was standing by the kitchen island, holding a box of dishes. She was silent, her face pale. Sophie, I said. If one day you want your children to know that their grandparents are not fiction, my door is open. I will always have tea and cookies for them. But I do not have a house for my son anymore. I turned and walked out of the door just as a large, moving truck pulled up to the curb. Aaron and Lila hopped out of the cab, their faces bright with the excitement of a new beginning. They waved at me, ready to claim the keys to their future. Behind me, the sound of Lucas sobbing faded into the background, drowned out by the noise of the moving truck's engine. I got into my car and started the ignition. I had not sold my son's home out of spite. I had simply returned him to the real world, to a place where actions have consequences and where you cannot bury the woman who gave you life just to get a pretty picture. It was the only wedding gift that would ever truly teach him how to be a man. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I'd love to know where you folks are tuning in from, so please drop a comment below and let's get a conversation going. If you enjoyed this drama, make sure to subscribe to Grandma's Family Diary, smash that like button, and hit the hype button to help this story reach even more people.